Hello dear friends and students. Welcome you in today's lecture on one of the prominent modern political philosophers called Hegel. In the current lecture, I will give you a brief life history of Hegel, discuss his dialectical method, examine his views on the philosophy of history, his concept of state, and finally, I'll discuss the concept of freedom given by Hegel. Let me begin with talking about Hegel's life history. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was born in Stuttgart, then in Prussia, presently in southern western Germany. His father, Georg Ludwig Hegel, was a provincial official. From the very young age, Hegel was seen as a very serious and hard-working student and used to read Shakespeare, ancient Greek philosophers, the Bible and German literature. In addition to German language, Hegel also learned Greek, Hebrew, French and English. After Hegel joined University of Tübingen at the age of 18, he met other two fellow students, Friedrich Hölderlin and Friedrich Schelling, who became vital to his development of thought. The three became close friends, sharing a dislike for the restrictive environment of the seminary. Having graduated from the Tübingen seminary in 1793, Hegel became house tutor to an aristocratic family in Bern, Switzerland, and then took a similar position in Frankfurt from 1797 to 1801. During this time, Hegel produced works on Christianity, and his friend Hölderlin began to exert an increasingly important influence on his thought. In the year 1801, Hegel secured a position as an unsalaried lecturer at the University of Jena. Along with Schelling, Hegel lectured on logic and metaphysics and on an introduction to the idea and limits of philosophy. In the year 1802, Schelling and Hegel founded a journal called the Critical Journal of Philosophy, and he produced his first real book on philosophy titled The Difference Between Fichte's and Schelling's Systems of Philosophy in the year 1801. In the year 1805, the university promoted Hegel to the position of extraordinary professor. Under some financial pressure, Hegel brought about the book which introduced his system of philosophy to the world called Phenomenology of Mind in the year 1807. Immediately after the Napoleon, whom Hegel greatly admired, had entered the city of Jena and closed the university, consequently, Hegel was forced to move from Jena and work as an editor of a newspaper in Bamberg. From the year 1808 until 1816, Hegel was headmaster of a gymnasium in Nuremberg, where Hegel developed the idea of a comprehensive encyclopedia of philosophical sciences, later published in 1817 in the form of a book. Between 1812 and 1816, Hegel published his second major work, Science of Logic, in 3 volumes. From 1816 to 1818, Hegel taught at the University of Heidelberg and later joined the University of Berlin as the chair of philosophy and remained there until his death in the year 1831. Hegel published his Elements of Philosophy of Right in 1821. At the height of his fame, his lectures attracted students from all over Germany and beyond, and he was appointed rector of the university in 1830 and decorated by King William III of Prussia for his service to the Prussian state in the year 31. Now let me give you an introduction about Hegel's political philosophy. Hegel was a central figure in the philosophical tradition known as German idealism. Though Kant is associated with the emergence of this tradition, but Hegel is seen as the culmination of this philosophical tradition. Nevertheless, he drew considerable inspiration from Kant besides Rousseau and integrated it with contemporary popular desire for German unification, leading to the rise of nation-states in Europe. Hegel is generally considered the most difficult of all major political thinkers to read and understand. Hegel was a major influence upon European thought generally and had much to say about politics, particularly in his book Philosophy of Right. His greatest contribution was a new discipline, the philosophy of history, a method of measuring historical evolution with the confidence of inevitable progression. He looks at history as the gradual evolution of absolute idea or the spirit. The most significant aspects of political philosophy is his theory of state, which is focus of the current lecture, based on the axiom that what is rational is real and what is real is rational. It means that for him all that existed or all that is real is rational because it's a part of unfolding reason. Similarly, all that is rational must actually exist. He raised the state to the highest level and called it the march of God on earth. He believed that the state is the highest and final manifestation of reason or absolute idea. Hegel's political philosophy has exercised great influence during the last 2 centuries. Quite often, it is believed that the rise of fascism in Italy and totalitarianism in Soviet Union can be attributed to his philosophy. This was an introduction about Hegel's philosophy. Now let me discuss some of the core elements of his philosophy, and I will begin with his dialectical method. The distinctive feature of Hegel's philosophical system is his dialectical method, which he described as the logic of passion. Hegel provides the most extensive general account of his dialectical method in part first of his Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences, which is often called the Encyclopedia Logic. Basically, dialectics is a term used to describe a method of philosophical argument that involves some sort of contradictory processes between opposing sides. Hegel borrowed this method from Plato, who was the main exponent of this method. In what is perhaps the most classical version of dialectics, the Plato presented his philosophical argument as a back and forth dialogue or debate, generally between the character of Socrates on one side and some person or group of people to whom Socrates was talking on the other. In the course of dialogue, Socrates' interlocutors propose definition of philosophical concepts or express views that Socrates challenges or opposes. Hegel's dialectical method played a major role in this political philosophy by applying the principles of a thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis. Hegel's major thrust was to solve the problem of contradiction. It attempted to reconcile many apparent contradictory positions and theorems developed by earlier thinkers. Having taken a clue from Socrates, Hegel argued that absolute idea or the spirit in search of self-realization moves from being to non-being to becoming. In other words, an idea moves from thesis to antithesis until a synthesis of the two is found. For instance, the thesis despotism will call into being democracy. The antithesis, and from the clash between them, the synthesis, constitutional monarchy, which contains the best of both results. Hegel insists that the synthesis will not be in any sense a compromise between thesis and antithesis. Both thesis and antithesis are present in the synthesis, but in a more perfect form in which their temporary opposition has been perfectly reconciled. Thus, the dialectic can never admit that anything that is true can never be lost. It goes on to being expressed, but in ever new and more perfect ways. Contradiction or the dialectic is therefore a self-generating process. It is the moving principle of the world. According to Hegel, dialectics is the only true method for comprehending pure thought. Hegel gave an example of its use in human consciousness, but a more comprehensive political use was found in the philosophy of right, in which the dialectical process reflected the evolution of world history from the Greek world to Hegel's time. For Hegel, There was a dialectical pattern in history, with the state representing ultimate body, highly complex, formed as a result of synthesis of contradictory elements at different levels of social life. However, the relationship between contradiction and synthesis was within concept shaped by human practice. Marx too discerned a dialectical pattern in history, but then understood contradictions between the means and relations of production at different stages of history. The another important component of Hegel's political philosophy is philosophy of history. Employing his dialectical method, Hegel developed one of his most enduring achievements, a philosophy of history based on change. History, according to Hegel, doesn't stand still, nor does it move at random. Hegel thinks that these great world historical changes of mind are leading somewhere and that something is guiding them. In the lectures on the philosophy of world history, Hegel says that sovereign of history is reason. Hegel's philosophy of history takes its starting point from the idea of spirit, which also meant mind in Hegelian philosophy. Spirit is self-conscious existence, the second nature that follows from the peculiar self-reflexive, precognitive nature of specifically human being. For Hegel, spirit encompasses subjective self-consciousness in all its dimensions, as well as institutions, practices, and values that transcend individual self-consciousness. As such, Hegel claims spirit is a kind of ongoing process of collective self-creation. The truth of spirit is self-determination, not because any individual mind creates world, but because spirit is constantly constituted and reconstituted through human thought and action, even as it constitutes and reconstitutes human thought and action. For Hegel's point of view, therefore, all forms of civilization and social organization should be understood in terms of freedom to the extent that they are not, then a mistake is being made. In his philosophy of history, Hegel reads the past in terms of this idea and argues that we can see a progressive historical development in world history as forms of spirit shift from mistaken modes of self-understanding towards the self-recognition of spirit in terms of freedom. The culmination of history arrives when spirit recognizes itself as free and reflects this self-understanding in its institutional as well as its artistic, religious, and philosophical life. Hegel identifies certain civilizations as incapable of fully grasping the nature of spirit. He sets up a kind of hierarchy in which African forms of civilization are claimed to be least developed, and in which the idea of spirit as self-determination is argued to take root only in the European history. In this respect, Hegel treats contemporaneous non-European modes of social and political organization as if they were in the some sense backward or in past. Now let us discuss another important element in the Hegelian philosophy, and that's his theory of state. According to Hegel, state is the representative of the divine idea. His theory of state is rooted in the axiom what is rational is real and what is real is rational. He considered the state as a march of God on earth or the ultimate embodiment of reason. For Hegel, state is the highest manifestation of reason because it emerges as a synthesis of family, that is thesis, and civil society or bourgeoisie society, that is antithesis. As an idealist, Hegel viewed the state as an organism having the highest right over the individual, whose highest duty in turn is to be a member of the state. For Hegel, the state is not the means but the end, the rational ideal in historical development, and the truly spiritual or intelligent element in civilization. From Hegel's point of view, therefore, the state is not composed primarily of its individual citizens, rather, it is the organization of lesser communities and corporations united in a political and social hierarchy of which the state is the apex. Hegel examined the different components of the state like the rule of law, the bureaucracy and monarchy. For Hegel, the structure of the state is determined by constitution. Hegel favored a constitutional form of monarchy over the absolutism of the Prussian state under which Hegel lived, but he thought of the constitution of the state as arising from the inherent rationality of historical conditions, not as a scheme contingently devised by the legislators. For Hegel, the rational structure of many subject matters, including the structure of freedom, follows three moments of the concept: universality, particularity and individuality. Universality refers to the movement of the free will in which it detaches itself from determinate contents. In particularity, it identifies with some contents while rejecting others, and with individuality, it fully determines its identity as the free individual. Hegel uses the same device in presenting the rational structure of the state. Universality corresponds to the legislature, particularity to the executive, individuality to the monarch, who represents the personality of the state. A rational constitution of a state, Hegel thinks, will not be set up on the assumption that there will be abuses and conflicts, but rather in a way that avoids or minimizes them. Moreover, the constitutions should be seen essentially a system of mediation. In effect, wherever elements within the state threaten to conflict, Hegel sees the constitution as inserting between them as a mediating element that has something in common with both sides and has the effect of diffusing the potential conflict. Thus, the state guarantees individuals' freedom, while at the same time the individual owes its moral duty. As in Rousseau, conforming one's will to the general will means obeying one's own higher self. It is the state that protects the freedom of civil society and provides the framework within which individuals can develop into full moral beings. Family relations are instinctual, while as the autonomy and contractual relations of civil society are conscious, although morally neutral. They are means by which the individual achieves self-realization. It is through the state that the final stage of that self-realization achieved, in which the individual consciously identifies himself with a higher purpose and is thereby fully developed and fully free. The modern state, Hegel insisted, was rational, as was the process of its creation through history. Part of this development was the conflict between states, which, especially in the extreme form of war, was a necessary part of the state, establishing its identity and unity. Beyond this, Hegel foresaw no further development, such as the system of universal peace envisaged by Kant. In a sense, history just goes on, while in other sense, it is over. Hegel's picture of reality is highly dynamic, yet all the restless movement apparently comes to a dead stop with Hegel's philosophy. Furthermore, philosophers are supposed to sum up a world that is passing, whereas Hegel appears to be presenting a permanent truth. This was an understanding and concept of Hegel's theory of state. Now let us discuss Hegel's idea of freedom, which is another important aspect of Hegel's philosophy. According to Hegel, the history of the world is none other than the progress of consciousness of freedom. The spirit, Hegel says, is free, for it has its center in itself, and self-satisfaction or realization is the very essence of freedom. Matter, on the other hand, is not free, for it is subject to the law of gravity and always tends to a point outside itself. Therefore, the development of history is thus the history of freedom. Human history culminates in the state in which the spirit finds its final embodiment. Therefore, the perfect state is the truly free state, and the citizen who gives perfect willing obedience to the perfect laws of the perfect state has perfect freedom. The individual is also an embodiment of the spirit, though not of course as a perfect as embodiment as the state. Hegel's doctrine of freedom is based on the old Greek notion that an individual finding his true personality and his freedom in the state. For Hegel, freedom of the individual is a social phenomena, and there can be no freedom in the pre-social state of nature. Freedom is self-realization, which is possible only in the state. Hegel says that the law of state is manifestation of objective spirit, and only that which obeys law is free, for it obeys itself. Hegel rejects the liberal concept of freedom as absence of restraints. According to Hegel, man's real substantive freedom consists in his submitting to and identifying himself with the higher rationality of state and law. Whether man submits voluntarily to the state or has to be constrained makes little difference, as the Hegelian concept of freedom refers not to the mode of action free personal choice between existing alternatives or forcible adaptation of conduct to prescribed rules, but to the object of action. In the philosophy of right, Hegel formulates positive freedom in terms of self-determination. Self-determination essentially means two things: that the self and not force outside itself determines its action, and in determining itself, it makes itself determinate, turning what is merely potential intended into something actual, realized and organized. Like Rousseau and Kant, Hegel maintains that the distinctive feature of a rational being is its freedom, more specifically its autonomy, its power to act on universal principles. This was Hegel's concept of freedom. Now let me conclude what we discussed so far. Hegel is undoubtedly one of the greatest political thinkers of modern times. He is regarded as a pragmatic thinker because he tried to idealize and rationalize the actual existing Prussian state. In his Science of Logic, an encyclopedia, Hegel gave as a systematic exposition of the method of dialectics and integrated it with his political philosophy as outlined in the philosophy of right. According to Professor Sabine, Hegel's theory of freedom was a part to the widespread reaction against the violence of the French Revolution. In the later half of the 20th century, Hegel's philosophy has undergone a major renaissance, partly due to the re-evaluation of Hegel as a possible philosophical precursor of Marxism, and partly due to a resurgence of the historical perspective that he brought to the everything, and an increasing recognition of the importance of his dialectical method. Hegel exerted considerable influence on subsequent political theory, particularly Marxism and existentialism. Both communists and fascists have claimed him as a philosophical inspiration. The British idealist T.H. Green adapted Hegelism to revise liberalism in the late 19th century. With this, I conclude today's lecture. Take care and God bless you.